I still remember the chill that ran down my spine when I first saw the invitation. It was a crisp autumn evening in Blackwood Hills, a small, secluded town in West Virginia, shrouded in a permanent veil of mist and whispers of old legends. Known for its eerie atmosphere and a history dotted with strange disappearances, Blackwood Hills was the kind of place where unsettling stories seemed almost normal. The town, surrounded by dense, shadowy forests, had always fascinated me and my friends. We thrived on the thrill of exploring its dark corners and unraveling its secrets. So when we received the cryptic invitation, our curiosity got the better of us. The envelope was old, yellowed with age, and sealed with a wax emblem we couldn't quite recognize. Inside, a single card was written in elegant, flowing script. You are cordially invited to an evening of unforgettable experiences. Follow the path to the mansion at the edge of the woods. Arrive by midnight. Come prepared for the unexpected. There was something unnervingly specific about the invitation, the way it promised experiences we could barely comprehend. It was as if it knew exactly how to tantalize our adventurous spirits. We laughed it off initially, thinking it was a prank or a clever marketing stunt for a haunted house attraction. But deep down, we knew there was a part of us that was eager to uncover whatever lay behind the words. As midnight approached, we gathered at the edge of town, the forest looming like a dark wall before us. The mansion on the outskirts of Blackwood Hills had long been abandoned, its walls covered in vines and its windows shattered. But tonight, it seemed to beckon us with an otherworldly allure. The invitation had promised an unforgettable night, but as we stepped onto the path leading to the mansion, the air grew heavier, and an unsettling feeling began to settle over us. When we arrived at the mansion, the sight was even more unnerving than I had imagined. The house loomed before us, its once grand facade now a grotesque parody of its former self. Boarded-up windows peeked through a tangle of ivy and thorns, and the overgrown garden had become a wild jungle of twisted branches and tangled roots. The mansion seemed to exude a palpable sense of dread, as if it were a living entity waiting to swallow us whole. As we crossed the threshold, the heavy, stale air hit us like a physical force. The mansion's interior was a shadowy labyrinth of decaying grandeur. Dust-laden chandeliers hung low from the ceiling, their crystals catching what little light seeped through the gaps in the boarded-up windows. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath our feet, amplifying every movement with a groan that seemed to echo from deep within the house's bowels. The atmosphere was oppressive, almost suffocating. A chilling draft swept through the corridors, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. We exchanged uneasy glances, our earlier bravado fading as we ventured deeper into the mansion. As we explored the rooms, the true horror began to reveal itself. In one room, we found a collection of disturbing artifacts, an old, dust-covered book with its pages filled with cryptic symbols and incantations, and a set of ancient candles, their wax dripping in eerie patterns on the floor. The walls were adorned with faded photographs, their frames crooked and tarnished. In each photo, we saw stern-faced individuals whose eyes seemed to follow us with a malevolent gleam. The most chilling discovery was a hidden compartment behind a rotting bookcase. Inside, we found a stack of journals, their pages filled with frantic scribbles and drawings of grotesque rituals. The entries detailed occult practices and dark ceremonies performed in the mansion's depths. As I read through the journals, a growing sense of dread gripped me. It was clear that those who had lived here before us had been involved in something profoundly sinister. The final entries described a series of disappearances, people vanishing without a trace, their fates sealed by the very rituals described in the journals. Our excitement turned to fear as the weight of the mansion's dark past settled upon us. It was as if the walls themselves were whispering secrets, and we were beginning to understand that our night of unforgettable experiences might be far more horrifying than we had ever anticipated. The moment we entered the main hall, the atmosphere was thick with a palpable sense of unease. The grand room, though once elegant, was now cloaked in shadows and festooned with eerie decorations. Flickering candlelight cast long, quivering shadows on the walls, and an unsettling hum of ambient music filled the air, its origin impossible to pinpoint. The guests were a bizarre assembly. Their costumes were a strange mix of outdated formal wear and occult-themed attire. Some wore masks with grotesque, exaggerated features, their eyes glinting with an unsettling mix of excitement and malice. Their conversations were hushed and fragmented, punctuated by occasional, unsettling bursts of laughter that seemed to carry a sinister undertone. As the evening wore on, an inexplicable sense of anticipation began to build. The air grew heavier, more oppressive, as if it were charged with an unseen force. We could feel the collective tension among the guests. It was as though everyone was waiting for something momentous and terrifying to occur. Without warning, the lights dimmed to near darkness, and a hush fell over the crowd. The music stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to stretch on forever. At the center of the room, a group of guests formed a tight circle around an altar draped in dark velvet. The altar was adorned with strange symbols and artifacts that looked as if they had been pulled straight from a nightmare. The ritual began. The participants, moving with a deliberate, almost hypnotic grace, started chanting in a language that was foreign and guttural. Their voices rose and fell in a rhythm that felt both mesmerizing and deeply unsettling. As the chant grew louder, the temperature in the room dropped sharply, and I could see my breath forming in small, ghostly puffs. One of the participants, clad in an elaborate robe with a hood pulled low over their face, stepped forward and placed a blackened knife on the altar. The ritual took on a more disturbing turn as they began to draw intricate symbols in a dark, viscous substance that seemed to seep from the knife itself. The substance glistened ominously in the candlelight, and I could smell a faint, metallic tang in the air. As the ceremony continued, the atmosphere became increasingly surreal. Shadows danced along the walls, moving in ways that defied natural law. Strange, otherworldly noises echoed through the room, and I could feel a presence, a malevolent force, pressing in on us from all sides. The ritual's intensity grew, and the chants reached a fevered pitch, each syllable resonating with a sinister urgency. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin as the participants began to sway in unison, their eyes rolling back in their heads. The sense of dread was overwhelming, and it became clear that whatever was being summoned from beyond was not just a figment of our imagination. It was something real, something ancient and terrifying. In that moment, I understood that we were no longer just witnesses to a macabre event. We were participants in something far darker and more dangerous than we had ever imagined. The line between reality and the supernatural had blurred, and as the ritual reached its climax, I could only brace myself for whatever horror awaited us next. The night took a horrifying turn the moment the ritual reached its climax. What started as an eerie sensation quickly spiraled into sheer terror. The mansion, once merely unsettling, now seemed to come alive with malevolent intent. Shadows writhed and twisted along the walls, moving with a purpose that defied logic. The whispers that had been a distant murmur now grew into a cacophony of voices, each one dripping with malice and urgency. It wasn't long before the first of my friends vanished. It happened so suddenly that it felt like a sick joke. One moment, Sarah was standing beside me, her face pale and filled with terror, and the next, she was simply gone. The space where she had stood seemed to swallow her up, leaving only an echo of her terrified scream and an empty spot in a sea of panicking faces. Panic erupted among us. We scrambled to find Sarah, to figure out what was happening, but the mansion had other plans. The corridors twisted into impossible angles, and rooms seemed to shift as if they were alive. The once familiar paths through the house now led us in circles, each turn only plunging us deeper into the heart of the nightmare. As I stumbled through the darkened halls, the oppressive weight of unseen eyes seemed to bear down on me. The walls themselves appeared to pulse with a malevolent energy, and grotesque apparitions began to manifest. Faces with hollow eyes and twisted expressions flickered in and out of sight, their mouths open in silent screams. The very air was thick with a chilling cold, making it hard to breathe. One by one, friends continued to disappear. Mark was the next to vanish, his cries for help swallowed by the encroaching darkness. I could hear the sound of his desperation, but no matter how hard I ran towards it, the sound seemed to grow fainter until it was gone entirely. In our frantic search for escape, we stumbled into a room with grotesque traps set by whatever entities had been awakened. Sharp, barbed tendrils of shadow lashed out from hidden corners, and unseen forces hurled us against the walls. We were trapped in a maze of our own fears, each step forward seemingly leading us further into the clutches of an unnameable terror. The mansion had become a labyrinth of horror, each corner hiding new, unspeakable horrors. Doors that once led to safety now opened into voids, and the windows that had once offered a glimpse of freedom were now mere black holes. The house seemed to breathe with an ancient, malevolent will, closing in around us, and the walls whispered in languages that made my skin crawl. The friends who remained were on the verge of collapse, their faces etched with terror and hopelessness. We were fighting not just to escape but to survive the terror that had been unleashed. The mansion's very essence seemed to feed off our fear, growing more chaotic and nightmarish with every passing moment. Desperation drove us to our breaking point. In the midst of the relentless torment, we could only hope for a way out, even as the darkness pressed in and the walls seemed to close around us, promising that the terror would never truly end. The morning after the nightmare, the once grand mansion stood silent and abandoned. The forest had begun to reclaim its property, vines snaking up the crumbling walls and the undergrowth swallowing the overgrown path leading to the entrance. Authorities, drawn by the desperate pleas of the few who escaped, arrived to find a scene of unsettling eeriness. There were no bodies, no trace of my missing friends, just remnants of a nightmarish ritual. Scattered amongst the debris were strange symbols, charred remnants of what appeared to be ancient sacrifices, and disturbing evidence of a malevolent force at work. Yet, despite the disturbing findings, there were no solid clues about the fate of those who had vanished. As the days turned into weeks, the mansion was left to its own devices. It seemed as if the house had been swallowed by the forest, its eerie silhouette obscured by the encroaching vegetation. Those few brave, or foolish, enough to venture close to the mansion in the months that followed reported an unsettling feeling that defied explanation. Whispers of an ever-present, oppressive force filled the air, and those who dared to approach felt an invisible weight pressing down on them, as if the house itself were waiting in malevolent anticipation for the next group of unwary souls to cross its threshold. Some survivors, still haunted by the night's horrors, spoke of nightmares that felt all too real. They were plagued by visions of shadowy figures and heard the chilling echoes of the ritualistic chants that had filled the mansion. They would wake in cold sweats, their hearts pounding, only to find themselves alone in their beds, but always with the sense that they were not truly alone. The mansion's dark legacy had seeped into the very fabric of Ravenswood. The local folklore grew darker, tales of the mansion being a gateway to another realm, a place where the veil between the living and the dead was thin and treacherous. The forest surrounding the mansion became a place of dread, where few dared to tread and where the fear of the unknown loomed large. Every so often, a new group of thrill-seekers or paranormal investigators would arrive, drawn by the stories of the haunted mansion. And each time, those who ventured too close would return with stories of feeling watched by unseen eyes, or witnessing shadows darting at the edge of their vision. The mansion, though now a mere ruin, had imprinted itself on the landscape and in the minds of those who dared to remember. The legacy of that night was one of perpetual fear and haunting mystery. The mansion had become a dark sentinel in the woods, its story one of perpetual waiting, as if it were biding its time, preparing for the next unwitting visitors to fall into its sinister grasp. The true horror was not just in what happened that night, but in the lingering terror that no one who came near could ever truly escape.